Now, what's amazing about the algorithm is that no matter what a government thinks, or what a religious group thinks, or your parents think, the algorithm can reach you. And enough.
Bienvenidos a Volver al Futuro Podcast, donde platicamos con las mentes que nos impulsan a crear el nuevo paradigma de salud y bienestar, conducido por Víctor Sadia.
Alex Dwek is the Chief Operating Officer at Nas Company, leading operations for Nas.io and Nas Academy. With a background in strategy and operations, Alex held leadership roles at Grab and Uber across Southeast Asia. He's a chartered accountant and a graduate of the University of Manchester, currently based in Singapore. In this episode, I sat down with Alex to reflect on some of today's most pressing questions. How do we build an authentic community in an increasingly digital world? We dive into how the poison of social media might also hold a cure, unpack the brokenness of the online job market, and question what skills truly matter in times of uncertainty and crisis. Drawing from his experiences in Singapore and East Asia, Alex brings fresh perspectives on leadership, strategy, and the power of values-driven action. Ultimately, this conversation is a deep dive into the complexity of human connection, one grounded in the belief that true community must be substantiated by physical presence, touch, and the simple, irreplaceable experience of being together. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Alex Dwek. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Victor. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I always introduce my podcast as good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever. And now it's evening for me, it's morning for you, so it's really applying.
It really is. It really is. So you're in Mexico right now. I'm in Singapore right now. So we are really crossing the entire world.
Yeah, it doesn't feel that far. So Alex, you told me that there's nothing out of bounds for this conversation, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but I'll take that you opened the door in a sincere way. And I would like to ask you as a first question, like, what is one of an experience that you had in your life that you seldom talk about that you think marked your personality and marked your values?
Wow, Victor, I may regret saying that anything is out of bounds, but this is a really great question. If it's something I've never talked about, I think one of the big turning points for me was actually as a 18, 19-year-old. I was at college, university in the UK, and I remember a very good friend of mine, she was living in like a student dorm, and she suffered a racist attack. So someone basically, she was very open with her faith, and someone targeted her, both on social media, but then also physically, where they went to her home and they actually like put a firework in her home, and they like tried to attack her. And the thing that really made such a big impression on me at the time was this terrible thing happened to her, but no one seemed to do anything. You know, that was the big penny drop for me. People cared. I think people did care, but they didn't do anything. It didn't lead to any action. And I remember at the time being so angry because I was like, there's clearly a problem here. You know, people are doing, these terrible things, and no one's standing up and saying it's wrong. And if you don't stand up and say it's wrong, you're almost letting it become acceptable. And this was such a big turning point for me because I realized at that point that I needed to use my voice more. I was angry about it, and one thing I could do, of course, is to comfort my friend. But the other thing I could do is to mobilize people, speak about it in public, find other people who cared about this issue and go and actually try and solve it at the time it was the university level. Like, how do we make this serious offense? How do we make sure that people are held to justice? And in that moment, why it was so pivotal for me was two reasons. Number one, it made me realize that actually I had a voice that could mobilize others, that I actually could speak in public, that I could motivate other people. And I'd never been inclined to do that before. The second thing that I realized, and I still believe this to this day, even in the most crazy times in our world, which is there is a silent majority that are rational, sensible human beings that believe in moderation, that believe in what's right and what's wrong, that have values that I would say are like shared, like as whether they're shared on things like you know, they could be shared on religion, they could be shared on just like ethics that are in the Judeo-Christian world, right, of what's right and what's wrong. Most people have sensible views. The problem is that most people who have these views are silent. And so I think after that moment, I almost committed the rest of my life to trying to be that public voice of moderation in different ways. So today we can talk about it, how I do it today with Nas, but before that, there were other things I was involved in. But I realized that the silent majority need to speak up more.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I fit in the world.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that at such an early age, 18 years old, this shook you in that way? Like you could probably be one of those persons who say, "Okay, this is the world as it is. I'm just stepping into the adult world. These things happen. There's nothing much to do. I'll just keep silent or whatever." Why do you think in your family history or in some way this really affected you and gave you the strength to speak up? Because it's not obvious.
Interesting. I think there may be two elements to my personality and maybe family history. So the first part is I'm an incredibly rational and logical person. So even if someone holds a very contrarian view, if they can explain it logically to me as to why they hold that view, I'm actually a very open person and I'm very receptive to these ideas. I think where I personally have always struggled is when there is no clear logic explained. So in the case that I mentioned, there wasn't really a clear logic in my mind as an 18-year-old as to why no one did anything, right? It didn't make sense to me. And that made me angry. So I think that was one element. I think another element that, I don't really speak much about is, maybe this drove the logic element, is that as a growing up as a young kid, my mom actually was quite sick. She suffered from, and she still does, from multiple sclerosis. And she was actually very, bedbound, basically. And she had a lot of major side effects from the medication that she took. And I think as a young kid, again, I didn't understand why, right? And that, I think, probably made me angry, if I'm honest. And so as a result, the consequence of that was to be extremely independent in my thought process, independent in the actions that I take. And that's maybe why, if I was to guess, I haven't actually really discussed this with a therapist or anything, but I would imagine that this is maybe what led me as an 18-year-old to take matters into my own hands independently. But interesting, just reflecting on this in the conversation, I think the other element is really around modeling on others. So I think that what I was privileged in seeing as an 18-year-old was seeing other people in my community being leaders, right? Seeing other people in my community who were philosophers who stood up. And I think this is what's really missing, I think, in some areas of society, which is that it's really hard as a young person to be able to stand up and do something without having that role model. For me, I was very fortunate. I had one or two role models that I really looked up to who were doing it. And I said, well, if they can do it, I can do it as well. So it wasn't sort of entirely in my own brain.
Okay.
I think it's easier today with the internet to have these role models, even outside of your social group or where you live. But I think I'm 37. I'm 37. So in my era, we were kind of at the cusp of the digital age, right? We were pre and post. We didn't have YouTube to quickly look up our heroes. So yes,
Yeah.
it was definitely a factor.
Okay. What I see is also that I don't know your mother, and thank you for sharing that part of her story, that she inherited you that strength, of moving forward in the world of unexplained and very awful things like MS, right? I
Yeah.
don't know her, but I assume that some sort of strength must have come from her, so that you believe in yourself in that sense.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to say, I have a lot of admiration for her. And just to share a little bit more information for those who are listening or watching, at her worst, she couldn't even get out of bed. Those 2, 3 years where she was unable to even go to the bathroom. Today, she's able to live, I'd say, 80% like a person who has no condition. She's walking around, she's able to travel. And so that took incredible strength from her. It's not just about what treatments you're on, it's also the mental strength. So I think you're probably right that that was also a role model of how to be strong and how not to give up.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that part of the story. And let me ask you this, because the follow-up question, you know where I'm going. How conscious were you while growing up that you were Jewish, and that Jews? I'm also Jewish. I grew up in Mexico City in a very close knit community, and we, at least in Mexico, but I think in general, Jews are very self-conscious about, we are in a sense different, and we have that narrative of we have to fend for ourselves. How was it for you in the UK? And then I'll follow up.
Yeah, so in the UK, I think Jewish people and minorities in general have been very lucky that in the last 60, 70 years, maybe since World War II, the UK has been a very welcoming and open place for minorities. And it's had a sort of mantra to be extremely tolerant of different backgrounds. And so growing up as a Jewish person in London, I think that on the one hand, it was a society that had no issues with being Jewish or anything else. And, you could, very openly talk about it and there was no fear. At the same time, and Victor, you'll probably relate to this, any Jewish young person who has grandparents still alive will know that the grandparents will probably tell you, you should always have your bag packed because you never know what will happen. Our history has shown us that, things can change. And it's funny that even being in such a tolerant society as the UK, that was still said to me by my grandparents. My grandparents grew up in the Middle East, so in Tunisia, Syria, Iraq, with three examples, and each of them had to leave their country, and because of change, societal change, lack of tolerance. So that was something that was very much in my household. When I got to 18, and that example I gave at university, unfortunately, I was also exposed to the intolerant part of the UK. So many people who are on social media today see more of this intolerance through TikTok, through Instagram, of people who are angry and people who do not respect each other. And it's funny because I experienced that 15, 16 years ago, but there was no TikTok. So when I experienced this, I'll give you some examples. On my university campus, people were saying, we are all Hezbollah, we are all Hamas. They would wave flags. There was, activities which were saying that, Holocaust Remembrance Day was not honored properly because it was politicized. So these were extremely frustrating and distressing at times situations. But I don't think I saw it as like endemic to UK as a whole. I think, we can talk about this, but I think the world has changed since then. I think that, funnily enough, I spent time in Mexico City and in the UK. And I think that I feel almost more comfortable expressing my identity in Mexico City than I do in London today. And on top of that, I do think at the time before that, I was, you do talk about it. Maybe you are a little bit self-conscious about being a minority and being Jewish. But over time, actually, as a person, I have got to the point where this is who I am. I'm going to openly express it. I think, Victor, we talked about this, but I even on social media, I express that I'm Jewish. And my view is people should just deal with it. And if they have a problem with me, say it to me. I probably don't want to associate with you either. But I would say now I live in Singapore. I'm very blessed that Singapore is a society that really places emphasis on something they call racial harmony, which is not just about multiculturalism. UK was very much about multiculturalism. You kind of tolerate each other's cultures, which I actually think overall, and we can talk about it, I think that that model failed. But what Singapore says is it's not about just tolerating each other. It's about creating a fabric or a system where people live in harmony. So in a tolerant society, you can tolerate intolerance. But in a harmonious society, you cannot, because it will lead to disharmony. So I have actually changed my entire opinion around how minorities live together. And I think that it's the emphasis should be more on harmony than on tolerance, which is
Absolutely.
a really interesting idea. Yeah.
It is. It is. I think life thrives on diversity. And as soon as we become standardized and homogeneous, then there's no life possible.
Yeah.
It's the same with the microbiome, right? If we are killing all the viruses and bacteria out there, these beings are the ones giving us life and allowing for the regeneration of life and death and the ecosystems. So yeah. So 2 days ago, a person asked me, "What's your animal? That your power animal?" They were saying, "No, I'm a bat, and I'm a lion." And I said, "I am a snail because I have my home in my back, right? And I'm ready to move, and
Interesting.
I want to feel like not very heavy, but light, right?" Also, in the light of these fires in California, I've been really thinking about these things that we call home and the grounding our stuff gives us, which is amazing. But at the same time, is that we are not our belongings, and our house should fit in a sense a backpack, right? Um, but let's talk on that topic, or you want to comment on that? Go ahead.
I would say two things. Number one, it's funny. You should look at it's Chinese New Year this week. You should look at your Chinese zodiac. So it tells you a lot about, the animal and the association. And I do really believe in that. I'm a rabbit. I'm on the cusp of rabbit and dragon. I actually think that represents my personality quite well, because a rabbit is nimble and is fast, but a dragon is also a little bit stubborn and fierce. I think it's probably represents me. I'm actually quite a calm person on the outside, but I'm quite stubborn. But I would say something else about living and your environment. So in Singapore, this is a country that is a city state. There is a real lack of space. And so what the government did, and by the way, it's only been around since 1965, so it's a really new country. And what the government said was that actually, in order for people to live happily, we want to change the notion that you need to own large property and you need a lot of space. In fact, when you think of space, space is used for different things. So there's space for sleeping. There's space for like leisure. There's space for eating. And what they said was that your apartment or where you live should really only be about sleeping. But if we narrow down the space in which you live, we can actually create other areas where you can socialize, eat, do things. And what's really interesting in that model is that it completely changes your perspective on the kind of space that you need and actually how many possessions you need to hold. So I went from actually in the UK, where there's a real culture of land ownership for many, many hundreds of years. Your status in the world is kind of like how much land you own. In the old school way today, it's probably like how big your house is. In Singapore, there is a real kind of almost like equality where you roughly have an apartment the same size. Maybe your furnish is slightly different depending on how much money you have. But then in the apartment, there is a communal dining area. You can rent a space to host a dinner party. There is a playground for your kids. There is sports activities there. And you know what's amazing about that is in that environment, you are so much less lonely. Because what ends up happening, and I actually did an experiment where I was in the UK, and I was like, how many human beings do I interact with in 24 hours? And what I realized was that it was very low. You live in your home, you don't tend to interact with anyone who's not in your home. Then you may go to the shop, you just walk, you may not see anyone, right? And then you go and buy your groceries and you go home. In Singapore, literally to just leave your home, you're passing all the communal areas. You say hello to 10 people. You end up hosting your friends downstairs. You have nothing to do. You go down to the communal area where people are eating together, talking together. And this is really powerful because I think that now, as an individual, you start thinking about how do I own less possessions? How do I be more deliberate about my space? And I'm now a believer, a strong believer in property ownership and all these physical possessions are, as you said, they're just a weight on your back that actually it's a disabler rather than an enabler. The more that you own, the more reasons you cannot actually have freedom and do things. So your goal in life is to actually minimize those constraints. And then I think it really empowers you. And this is something that Singapore has taught me a lot about.
Wow. I love how the conversation is being weaved because I wanted to get to this topic of community and I wanted to ask you about Singapore and you know everything is connected. Um, so let's weave that with this idea of you know having a country like the UK you know vouching for tolerance and for Singapore vouching for racial harmony and building proactively something beyond the tolerance of being beside people who are different, right? Now let's scale this to the another country, which is the internet, right?
Mm.
And there you have all sorts of voices and channels. And as we say in philosophy, the medicine is also the poison, right? So in the internet, you can find your heroes and these great examples, but at the same time, you'll find the haters. And the algorithm, and that's what worries me, is that it's not centralized. And the algorithm will do many things, and it usually tends to showcase the hate speech and the extremist and fanaticism much more than the other ideas, right? So this is a very difficult topic to really grasp and get our hands around. But I wanted your initial thoughts on this and how does this play out in your mind where it's really a big thing in terms of the future we might see the world going to.
So I think we need to divide the internet up actually in this discussion. So the first thing is to talk about the social media platforms. So when the point you made about hatred is really spot on. And I wanted to explain a little bit about why hatred almost gets rewarded in the social media world. Ultimately, the goal of social media platforms is to keep users on the platforms. That's their goal. They want to keep you there. And they realize that in order to keep you there, they need to strike emotions. Emotions can be positive. I'm so happy. This is amazing. This is so inspiring. And emotions can also be negative. I'm so angry. I'm so frustrated. So the algorithm does not prioritize content as to whether that emotion is good or like happy or sad or angry. It just prioritizes emotion. So I always say to people, if they see a piece of content that really upsets them, if they don't want to see more of that content in their feed, do not comment and like on it, even if you're like criticizing it. Because as soon as you do that, what you're sending the message to the algorithm is, I want to see more of this, or this video should be promoted. So social media rewards outrage. Now, you can look at outrage in two ways. You can say outrage is an incredibly negative thing because for people's mental health, state of mind, and it also can promote extremism. On the other hand, outrage is also a test of relevance. Victor, if I write a post, even no matter how controversial it is, if I am not relevant, people are not going to spark outrage, right, at what I say. So, at Nas Daily, we always say that, sometimes it's better to have angry people than to have no people at all. And this is something I think everyone should consider when we're talking about an issue. Now, the flip side of that is when you think about the internet, I would say today, on the one hand, we've never been more connected. The internet allows people of an interest. You could be in a village, right, in India, and you have a really specific niche interest that no one in your village cares about. And you can find 100 other people on the internet who also care about that, and you can connect with them, which is truly amazing. But at the same time, I also think we've never been more lonely, despite having all this connection. We doom scroll, right? We sit there and we look at other people's lives and we say, why is my life worse than what I see on the internet, which is normally not necessarily real? We also spend much more time, with our phones than we do interacting with humans. And so I think that in this world of outrage and loneliness, it actually gives even more reason where we need community leaders on the internet. We need the people who can make sense and organize this chaos. They typically can be content creators, which can be people, and why I say content creators are, they're essentially people who can communicate using the tools of the internet and take advantage of the infrastructure of the internet to reach people and unify them behind a message. And the other aspect are, I would say, are internet organizers. There are people who may not be creating content like videos, but they know how to engage a group of people who are like-minded. And so I think in the past, these people, especially community, like internet organizers or community organizers, have been seen in maybe a more like a condescending light. For example, a company hires a community manager. They're just looking at someone who just manages the Instagram account. I think in the future, the concept of a community manager is actually going to be much bigger than that. And they're going to be paid a lot more money, because the more people they're able to congregate, the more essentially money passes through this group of people, the more that value you're creating. And I think that becomes very interesting. So I think to summarize the answer to your question, number one, hate exists on the internet. It's real. It's a part of how the platforms work, but it can be channeled in a positive way. And also the way the internet's organized allows opportunity for people to bring together like-minded people. And I think this is really the future of commerce and business over the next 5 to 10 years.
So how do you think, like your examples in Singapore and London are illustrative? What do you think when you hear the word community, right? Because it's a word that we throw, right and left. And we know it's important, but we don't really slow down to define what community is, what community could be, what community should be, and what does it mean to have that definition in the physical and the digital world.
So I actually think community is unfortunately a very overused word, and it means different things to different people. If I was to try and define it, I would say communities are networks of individuals who tend to share some sort of common identity or value. And they typically congregate around each other and codify a set of rules and norms to which they abide by. And what's very interesting is you could take religions in that way. So you could take Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and you could say that kind of makes sense. A Christian community has a group of like-minded people who their codified rule could be the Bible and also the rules of Christianity. And they all kind of congregate with a specific goal, which is to serve God and to live a fulfilling life. What's also interesting about a network is that countries are also communities. So a country also has a group of people who their shared value is they live in a specific geographic location, and they typically share some sort of cultural norms, which has brought them together. So I would say religion and country are good common examples in the physical world. You also have things like neighborhoods and proximity. In the online world, community tends to be centered around an idea or a topic of interest. So a community on the internet could be, I'm interested in medicine, right? And we all talk about it. It could be, I'm interested in something new like crypto. Hey, this is a new idea. There isn't really something in the physical world. Let's congregate together because we're dispersed. Now, interestingly, there's a guy, a philosopher or a writer called Balaji, who talks about he was the ex-CTO of Coinbase back in the beginning, and he's written about this idea called the network state. He believes that actually this physical and internet will converge. So in the future, he says you could actually build a country on the internet. Which is that you have a group of people dispersed, but all share the same values. They could form a government, they could form a currency, they could form, they don't need necessarily the physical space to bind them. And I think so I think that these two worlds will converge. I think that today what's missing in order to do that is the infrastructure. And I think is what's being developed. I think some of that exists. I think AI will make it easier. I think things like building on the blockchain will make it easier as well. But I think the notion of a network, why do we like it? Why do we like community? I think that we tend to gravitate as humans towards people that have some sort of shared interest or value. We need some sort of association where we can look at someone and nod. Like, great, we understand each other, because we abide by something that brings us together. So, Victor, you and I may bond over building online communities and the internet. We could bond over our faith because we're both Jewish. But each of those give us at least a reference point in which to talk.
Yeah, great. Thank you for defining community. What happens, I'll try to put this into words, which is, community is not only a desire, it's a need, a human need, a life need, in terms, so that life can exist, we are communal beings, right? We're individuals, but we are always part of the network, and the network, not only we create the network, we're not only individuals who are coming together to create a network, the network precedes the individual, right? Without a network,
Yes.
You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't eat.
Yes.
Right? You wouldn't be able to go outside your home. And in that sense, I do believe, I don't have a question here, but if we live in a world where there's a lot of hatred and a lot of loneliness, for me, I'm studying a lot about community and how it precedes life, right? It precedes the individual.
Mm-hmm.
But my felt experience is not, and I'm a bounded individual. As an adult, I'm almost self-sufficient, and I choose to go with my wife and with my partner and with my kids and with my friends. But I don't feel in my body all the time that I'm existing because these people are around me all the time, right? And yeah, I don't know if you can get that feeling out of the internet, because it feels like that you went there, but at the same time, the internet and the community is also giving you the possibility of acquiring an identity, because now you find something that is similar to you, right? And this, oh yeah, I'm an individual and he's an individual. And so I don't have a question here other than just putting the complexity of understanding that we're, yes, individuals with boundaries, but at the same time, we are networked through and through.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, now that you are in the software development and digital community development, how these things, you see them evolving or not in the experience that people who are belonging to these communities are feeling differently or not from other experiences offline.
So it's really interesting you say that, because you're right. We're building software for communities with Nas.io. We're helping people manage that experience. And we've thought a lot about this online versus offline. And I think the way that we look at it is that a community can congregate by meeting each other online, because online is one of the best ways to discover ideas. But in order to actually cement the community, they really do need to meet offline. And with Nas Daily, that's exactly how we built our own community. So we started with 1-minute videos every day for 1,000 days. This was purely online. But then we said, we want to strengthen the community. So we started running Nas Summits, in-person events. In fact, actually, when we did the 1,000-day journey, we used to hold meetups in every country we went to as a way to meet people on the ground, crowdsource video ideas. So there was always a physical element going through, but the cementing of the community was absolutely the in-person. So when we designed Nas.io, we actually said we want digital products on there, but we also want to be able to create physical experiences, and a community should do both. And I know, Victor, for you, for example, with Amev, you have both the online community and you have the physical experience. And I think those two are so complementary. So I do absolutely sign up to that approach.
Yeah, yeah. That this tranquilizes my nervous system, because I sometimes feel that there are people who believe that the online community will replace the offline community, and I think it's biologically impossible. Biologically impossible, and yeah, I think it's just a matter of talking more about this, right? Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, if we don't, we lose ourselves. Like for example, I live away from the city, and in the pandemic I moved away from the city where I met all my friends every week, right? And I like I'm very good at making friendships over WhatsApp. Like I allow myself to be vulnerable. I won't I won't block you if you send me a 5 minute WhatsApp audio, right? I'll hear you out and I'll then express myself. But I was falling into the trap that I could substitute my offline life with the online one.
Mm.
And I started really getting emotions, or even diseases in my body, that it needed the physical part of it, right?
So
You and I
interesting.
can be friends, but if we never hug each other, I don't know if we can call ourselves friends in that deep, in the deep meaning way, right? So yeah, I'm glad that you are working on this too, my friend.
I think it's so important. And I think as a society, we learned this through the pandemic, which was that we got so excited that we could do everything on Zoom. Companies were like, we don't need to go back to the office. We don't need to. And you know what? Most of that has been reversed. And I don't think it's a control thing. I think there are some arguments, oh, it's a control thing. But in the sense of building a startup, one of the things that we realized when we were entirely remote was that a lot of innovation happens through, they call it the water cooler conversations. It's those serendipitous interactions that just lead to random conversations, ideas, sparring off each other. If you get on a Zoom call, if let's say you and I have a 30-minute Zoom call, we're going to go through an agenda because we have 30 minutes, let's get through it. We don't have time for spontaneity. But if we're sitting together, in Mexico City having a coffee, there's a lot we can talk about. And so that is an essential part of forming community, actually. And I think that's why I do. I'm not just saying it because I believe it. I also have experienced it as well.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy that a big company such as yours is thinking about this, and it's not only saying, yeah, the physical part is important, but how to do both. It's a big challenge, and I think it's important to hold those important things in the same sentence. And this brings me to the next question, which is, I saw an online blog post you put on the job market, and the online job process, and how it's broken, because people who are hiring, or companies who are hiring, are looking for academic qualifications and awards and milestones and brand recognition of past companies. But when you said actually they should focus on other skills, and the number one skill
Mm.
you listed was handling ambiguity, which really
Mm.
resonates with me, because even now we're talking about the importance of online communities and offline communities, or the poison and the medicine of social media, right? It's holding ambiguity and not saying this is good, this is bad, and they're both good and bad at the same time, not only with two variables, but with many variables. How do you think about ambiguity, and how choosing that kind of people for a company might be initially complex, because, what does that really mean? But how does that evolve in a culture where ambiguity and uncertainty is praised, right?
Mm. Wow. It's a good question. Look, I think on the online job process, what I was saying, you hit the nail on the head, which is that if you're trying to work in an industry that's extremely innovative and new, past qualifications do not tell you whether that person can adapt to the change. That is sort of the essence of it. So then the question is, how do you assess ability to handle ambiguity? It's actually a really hard thing to assess for. I think there's a few ways you can. I think, first of all, this is really going back to your very first question that you asked me. Handling ambiguity is really shaped by the experiences that you have. So I think if I look at my ability to handle ambiguity in the working world, it's because of a few experiences I had in early companies I worked for that went crazy, that changed, and I was like, wow, it was not so bad. You build resilience. So I think to test that, you need to see, number one, have people gone through ambiguity before? If they've gone to the perfect high school, the perfect Ivy League institution, they've got the perfect job, they've never experienced failure in their life, the chances that they're going to handle ambiguity is going to be very low. So actually, I embrace, when I interview people, failure. I embrace when someone didn't succeed. And what I'm interested in about is how did they respond to that? So that is one part that I think is important. And I think the second part around this world is that, unfortunately, I've hired some really amazing people on paper that have failed or not succeeded in the environment of a startup. And that's because there's a perception of what a startup's like, which is probably what they see in movies. It's very glamorous. You make a lot of money if it does well, all this stuff. But the reality is it's a grind. And I think that when it comes to that grind or that commitment to building, it's not just about, some people define that based on where you are in life. They might be like, hey, if you are someone with 2 kids and a wife or husband, you are not suited for startup life. If you're 22 with no commitments, you're suited to startup life. I actually disagree with that. I disagree with that a lot, because I think it really comes down to what your priorities are. So I have kids, I have a wife, I'm working all the time in a startup. But for me, what I'm assessing is the quality of the time I spend. I'm not spending like, whether my job is 9 to 5, I'm looking at, how much when I do not work, am I actually present in my family's life? And so these are the things that I look for when I look at and assess an individual. And I think a lot of people get overlooked just because they're like, oh, this person is 35. They can't work at a startup. Or as you said, this person doesn't have a good GPA. But I don't think that's how the world's going to work, especially with AI. I know it's a buzzword, but I really do believe that, again, handling ambiguity is going to be so critical when every traditional job is changed, because you're going to have an AI agent that's going to assist you. This is just going to flip on its head what is considered work from a human and what is going to be done by a machine. And in that world, we have to be good at learning new things, not good at one specific thing. And we're going to have to be good at being like, excuse my language, shit, everything that I've done in the past is now obsolete. And okay, great. But we have this amazing new technology which allows us to do things 3 times as fast and with greater precision. How do I now utilize that? So this is the world we're going into. So I think actually this is only going to become more important.
Yeah. Tell me something on the personal side. How do you handle ambiguity? And what are the things that trigger you the most when there's ambiguity in your life? And what do you do?
So the way I've approached difficult, risky, challenging decisions is I ask this one simple question. I ask, what is the worst that can happen? If everything goes wrong and we're in the doomsday scenario, what's the worst that can happen? And then I ask a second question, which is, can I live with this worst case scenario? As long as I can live with it, then actually the worst case is not so bad. So for example, when I made a decision to join Nas Daily, Nas Company, it was a startup with just a handful of people. It had no funding. It was a very risky decision for someone who I just had a newborn baby. But then I said, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst thing that can happen is after a few months, we run out of cash and the job doesn't exist. But at the same time, I would have learned so much about how to operate at this very early stage. And you know what? I have confidence in my skill set that I'll find another job. So then I was like, you know what? The worst case scenario is really not that bad. I can live with it. So I think handling ambiguity is being tolerant of the worst case scenario. And I think the second thing is sometimes we reward persistence. We say just being persistent and not giving up is a great thing. But actually, one of my biggest reflections in startup life is sometimes persistence is the wrong decision. Because if you keep persisting down a path that is not the right one for your business, you're not going to learn. So actually, it takes courage to stop and say, this is the wrong path. We need to make a change. We need to give up on this path. We need to pivot the business. We need to do something else. And it's almost counterintuitive to everything that at least I had learned. So how do I deal with ambiguity in that sense? I think the second part is just being open to saying that everything we're doing is entirely wrong and to not take it personally and to say this is just part of the journey.
Wow. I needed that. Thank you. So one
it's
more,
hard.
Yeah, it's hard, but at the same time, I like it because, as you said, you are a very rational person, and these rational questions are very generative, right? And it curbs the instinctual fear that that ambiguity entails. So yeah, let me just go back for an important question that I wanted to ask you, and regarding online communities. And let's say that an online community forms around a specific topic and money is moving hands, right? They pay to belong to a community. I don't think it's a conflict of interest, but how to balance scalability, bringing more people in, bringing more cash in, while maintaining transparency and this feeling of belonging. When there's an economic transaction, right? Because the money really changes the psychology, and asks questions of why am I here and why is this money being asked from me and what am I expecting back because I put my credit card in. So I see where I'm getting at, right? How does the money question play in maintaining authenticity in a community?
So first of all, it's a question that a lot of community builders ask. And I think it comes down to the fact that when you build a community that's free, for example, you do it for just the intentions are always the right intentions, which is that I want to create a fantastic experience with like-minded people, and I want them to really appreciate and have something meaningful. But ironically, when we talk about paying for something, we go into this transaction relationship and we say, oh, transaction can be a negative thing, and paying for something means, the relationship changes. I think the truth is that nothing that's really valuable should be free, actually. If you are running the community, Victor, you're putting so much effort into this. You're putting so much of your life, you care about it, you're cultivating it, you're nurturing it. The truth is that if it's free, you're not going to be able to do it forever. You're just not, because humans have needs. You need to, put food on the table, right? At the end of the day, that costs money. So ultimately, if something is free, my view is that it will eventually die. And so when you look at it in that way, earning money from a community or transacting is about survival. It's about making it sustainable. Then the question is, what is the relationship between that payment and what they offer? So one of the things I say to a lot of community builders is, the first really important thing is transparency. Be open with your community. Say, hey, running this community that you really enjoy takes 15 hours a week of my time. This takes a lot of effort. this is all the things I'm doing behind the scenes. And I want to make this community be able to thrive. I want to introduce these 10 new things. I want to be able to give us an admin to be able to help us run it. I want to be able to go to the market and bring lots of exciting new things to you. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is by bringing in income. When you explain it in that way, you'd be surprised how many users will resonate with that and be supportive of it. Now, the question is, of course, there are questions on how much to charge and what, but that can be something that you can present to your community and actually democratically decide. Now, if the community rejects paying, there are two factors to consider. Number one, is it because they don't see enough value in what you're offering? Well, that's really important to know. There's no point being in denial about that and just say, I'm never going to ask because I don't want to address that question. The other reason could be that it's like means tested, meaning that maybe the community, the people cannot afford to pay. Now, if it's the latter, which I see a lot in like nonprofits, then I would recommend that you still have a funding source, but maybe it doesn't come from those people. This is when you can partner with organizations, brands. There are other business models you can use. But the point is that every community should have revenue. I believe this very strongly. Now, how you use that revenue. So I see some people on the internet, unfortunately, who take advantage. They promise the world and then they don't deliver. They'll say, hey, I'm going to make you rich. They'll charge money, and then it's not true. So I think as a community builder, community owner, you need to understand that your goal is sustainability and retention. So it's not about maximizing how much money you make on day one. It's about making an experience where you continue to make money. The truth is, a good community makes actually a little bit of money at the beginning, and then it grows over time, just like a business. A community is like a company. So avoid going for the get rich quick, pump and dump. Focus on sustainable growth, sustainable revenue. And the good thing about a community is as you add more resources, events, content, the community's value just increases over time, because someone who joins on day 100 gets a lot more content and people and interactions than on day one. So as your community increases in value, technically you should be able to increase your earnings. So that's how I think about it. But in terms of how much to charge, I think it really depends also on how much time you're giving and whether you're going for example, some people go for a mass market community that's get tens of thousands of people and get charged them, let's say, $10 a month. Or some people go for a very premium experience, which is like, hey, I want a group of really expert professionals or entrepreneur CEOs. I'm going to charge a lot more, but I'm going to give them a lot more of my time. So I would say match what you charge for the amount of time and commitment that you're giving.
Beautiful, beautiful, my friend. Thank you so much for that piece of wisdom. So we're approaching the end of this conversation. I don't know if you would like to add something just to close up the conversation.
Yes, Victor, first of all, it's been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it. We've gone in a lot of different areas. I will leave everyone with a positive thought, which is something we learned with Nas Daily. So we talked about the algorithm and how social media is a place for hate. But there's also a positive side to the algorithm, which is that in today's world, think about the fact that in today's world, many countries are not a free society. Whether you're in Europe, Latin America, Middle East, there are countries that suppress freedom of speech. There are countries where people do not get access to information in the same way. Now, what's amazing about the algorithm is that no matter what a government thinks, or what a religious group thinks, or your parents think, the algorithm can reach you. And in Nas Daily, we saw this because we're from, as a company, the founder of Nas Daily is from the Middle East. He's an Arab Muslim who is from Israel, so a Palestinian and an Israeli. It's very complicated. But what we found with the content, we made a lot of content about how Jews and Muslims should coexist and live together and respect each other. And what was amazing was the feedback we were getting. We were getting feedback from a kid in Egypt, an adult in Lebanon, a soldier, an IDF Israeli soldier, a person who lives on a settlement, right? A person who maybe supports terrorism groups, who said, I actually have changed my mind. And this is not possible without the algorithm, because traditional media, if you believe If you're a left-wing person, you'll read left-wing media. If you're a right-wing person, you read right-wing media. If you're Hebrew, you read Hebrew media. If you're Arabic, you read Arabic media. But what's amazing about content is that it's not about who you follow anymore with the algorithm. It's about how you behave. So if you stop scrolling, the algorithm will send you that content. So Nas Daily was able to promote a positive message, and thanks to the algorithm, able to win hearts and minds that would otherwise never be exposed to a positive message. So this is our opportunity. All the voices of moderation. We do not need to let the extremists win. We need to take advantage of this blessing in a way.
Are you in touch with your friend that was racially abused when you were 18 years old?
I am. I am still loosely in touch with that person. Yeah. What do you think? Should I? Is there something I should be doing?
I think you should tell her how that experience really influenced you, because in that influence, it's permeating your business, your communities, me, and that event. I wouldn't say, that event really marked not only your life, but probably others. And yeah, that's also thanks to the algorithm and the bravery and the courage that some people have to put this out there and trust that the algorithm will also make that job. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I am grateful. Sometimes difficult situations lead to long-term positive outcomes. So I think right now in the world, no matter where you are in the world, it feels right now a period of uncertainty, instability, a lot of friction. But I think this will hopefully inspire the young Alexes and Victors of the world. I hope that there is someone sitting there who's also 18 who uses this as a source of motivation to do positive things. And if that happens, I think the world, net, the world will only be in a better place when we sit here in 10 years' time.
Beautiful. I read a short quote a few days ago that says that darkness, if you can characterize our times as of dark times, darkness, it's a light that it's just wishing and hoping to be observed and, shined upon. So yeah, Alex, thank you so much. And
thank you, Victor.
Really appreciate your work, appreciate your smile, which is ubiquitous. You're smiling all the time, and that's the best gift you can give to the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this chat. I love what you're doing. And I'm looking forward to seeing you continue to thrive and succeed in this world.
Likewise, my friend. All the best to you. Good morning in Singapore.
Thank you.
Nos encantaría recibir tu retroalimentación de estos podcasts para continuar generando contenidos que te sean útiles e interesantes. Si puedes, déjanos un comentario en la página web victorsaadia.com.